When Victoria decided to join her husband on an adventure to the jungle, she never imagined that she would be overwhelmed by fear in the presence of a gorilla. But what happened with that gorilla took everyone by surprise and changed her entire view on these majestic creatures. Victoria's heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation as she set foot on the rugged trails of Pek Plateau National Park. The air buzzed with the thrill of a rare, once-in-a-lifetime experience. Jalta and Ema, two young male gorillas who had been released into the wild 4 years earlier, were the stars of this momentous occasion. Their release had been sponsored by the Aspen Foundation, and as the wife of the foundation's chairman, Damien, Victoria had been given a special chance to witness this event. Damien, who knew both gorillas personally, wanted her to meet them before their final farewell. Raised in a sanctuary by Damien himself, Jalta and Ema had enjoyed a comfortable life before being set free in the relative safety of the national park in 2003. Now, 4 years later, Damien was returning to check on his old friends. When they arrived in Gabon, Victoria and Damien were greeted by rangers from Pek Plateau. As they boarded boats, the rangers outlined safety measures and briefed them on the gorilla release. Victoria's nerves began to fray. Despite the incredible opportunity to see gorillas in their natural habitat, she was acutely aware of their unpredictable nature. She understood that many people wrongly perceive gorillas as wild and aggressive, when in fact they are gentle giants. But Jalta and Ema were not used to human encounters in their forest home, and this unfamiliar situation could unsettle them. Damien was confident they wouldn't harm them, but Victoria couldn't shake her unease. As the boats glided into the heart of the national park, Victoria was overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions: excitement, disbelief, and a creeping anxiety. When the boats finally stopped and the rangers helped them disembark, she noticed she wasn't alone in her feelings. The park authorities reminded them to stay as still as possible when the gorillas appeared. They needed to adjust to the humans' presence, and any sudden movements could turn this dream into a nightmare. The group settled quietly in the tall grass, anticipation hanging thick in the air. They were all so eager to witness the moment they had travelled so far for, yet no one dared to make a sound. Suddenly, Victoria felt the presence of something near the sniffing, the grunting, and the rustling of grass. The gorillas were approaching. The park ranger, seemingly attuned to her unease, gave a reassuring nod, confirming that Jalta and Ema were on their way. Then, as if emerging from a dream, two massive figures burst through the dense foliage. Victoria's heart raced. She had never felt such a mix of fear and awe. Jalta and Ema were even more majestic than she had ever imagined. The gorillas spotted the group almost immediately, emitting grunts that only heightened Victoria's nervousness. Ema, clearly the dominant one, approached first, sniffing around the group before wandering off, seemingly giving his approval. Jalta, however, stayed back, his eyes fixed on Victoria in a way that made her skin crawl. His occasional grunts and bared teeth, though never coming close, were enough to send waves of fear through her. Damien tried to calm the situation with soothing words, hoping the gorillas would recognize his voice and approach more closely. But Jalta and Ema seemed indifferent, uninterested in the interaction. After a few tense hours, the group retreated back to the boats and the relative safety of their lodging. The next day, as they prepared to return to the park, Victoria's sense of dread lingered. She had dreamed of this trip, but it wasn't unfolding as she had hoped. While she was grateful to have seen Jalta and Ema in the wild, Ema's dismissive attitude and Jalta's suspicious behavior left her feeling unsettled. Victoria couldn't shake the memory of Jalta's penetrating gaze. She secretly hoped that if they were to encounter the gorillas again, it would be only Ema, as she wasn't sure she could face Jalta a second time. The group nestled further into the thick foliage, their anticipation palpable. The park rangers, clearly excited for more interaction, hoped that Jalta and Ema would be more comfortable around them today, given their history with Damien. Victoria felt increasingly out of place, her excitement waning, but soon the familiar sounds of the gorillas approaching brought a flutter of nervous anticipation. Her heart raced as the grunts and groans grew louder. Ema emerged from the greenery, his movements cautious yet curious. Victoria felt a wave of relief wash over her. Ema had come on his own, and perhaps today wouldn't be so daunting after all. Her spirits lifted a bit, feeling braver than the day before. Ema approached the group, sniffing and inspecting their bags, which caused a few light-hearted giggles. The ranger had been right. Ema seemed to remember them and was eager to reconnect. When Damien spoke, Ema listened intently, finally recognizing the voice of the man who had raised him. But soon, Ema grew bored and laid down for a nap. Victoria watched him with a smile, relieved that the day was shaping up nicely. The presence of Jalta, who wasn't around, also helped ease her tension. As she observed the peaceful sight of Ema resting, she felt her stress slowly melt away. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Victoria spotted a dark shape moving among the trees. Jalta was back, and unlike before, he seemed more alert and intense. While the others in the group were excited by his arrival, Victoria's anxiety spiked. Jalta's changed demeanor unsettled her deeply. He emerged from the trees, standing on his hind legs to survey the scene. His immense size made Victoria shiver, her earlier relief replaced by a surge of fear. Torn between the instinct to look away and the need to keep track of Jalta, she remained as still as possible. Damien was captivated by the sight, but Victoria felt paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, Jalta locked eyes with her, grunting and staring directly at her. He then dropped back to all fours and began walking towards the group. His previous caution was gone, replaced by a determined curiosity. As he approached, his grunts grew louder, and Victoria felt the world closing in around her. She instinctively shut her eyes as Jalta neared, but could feel his warm breath on her face. When she finally dared to open her eyes, she found herself staring directly into the deep, muddy gaze of the gorilla. In an instant, Jalta grabbed her hand, and Victoria heard gasps from the group. She caught a glimpse of Damien moving closer, speaking softly to Jalta, hoping the gorilla would recognize him as Ema had. But Victoria's world felt like it was spinning, the words Damien whispered fading into a muffled blur. She had no idea that he was introducing her as his wife. Jalta's eyes locked onto Victoria's with a depth that felt almost like a silent conversation. He held her hand firmly, never breaking their gaze, and settled down right in front of her. Victoria felt her whole world shift in that moment. The park ranger's voice, gentle and low, explained that Jalta's grunts were his way of trying to communicate, but somehow Victoria already knew what she needed to do. With a mix of fear and instinct, she allowed Jalta to keep holding her hand and slowly raised her other arm. She made sure the gorilla could see her movements, then carefully wrapped her free arm around him. Despite the terror gnawing at her, she felt an undeniable urge to respond to the warmth in Jalta's eyes. What happened next left the group in stunned silence. Jalta leaned into Victoria, enveloping her in his massive embrace while still cradling her hand. The fear Victoria had felt melted away, replaced by the gentle warmth of the gorilla's breath. Jalta had no intention of hurting her, he simply needed to feel loved. Throughout the day, Jalta became Victoria's constant companion. He allowed her to stroke his head, and in return, he groomed her hair. He stayed close, showing no interest in anyone else in the group. The park ranger watched in amazement as the bond between Victoria and Jalta formed so swiftly. Victoria lay against Jalta's fur, touched his hand, and played with his fingers, each gesture strengthening their connection. As she nestled into his soft coat, she marveled at how the experience had surpassed her wildest dreams. Just when it seemed the day couldn't get any more incredible, Jalta gave the group one last unforgettable display. He snatched Victoria's baseball cap and paraded around with it perched backwards on his head. The group erupted in laughter, and even the park rangers were astounded. Jalta had transformed from a cautious figure into an endearing prankster in no time. The way he mimicked Victoria's actions with the cap showed off his intelligence and curiosity. He responded to her and Damien's voices, reminding everyone that he remembered the man who had raised him and saw Victoria as part of his extended family. As the day came to a close, Victoria reflected on how her morning dread had given way to an overwhelming sense of loss. Saying goodbye to Jalta was heart-wrenching. Sensing her sadness, Jalta gently cupped her face in his large hands and leaned in. They shared a forehead-to-forehead moment that felt profoundly intimate. Victoria lifted her head and placed a tender kiss on Jalta's nose, which elicited a soft grunt from him. She wished she could fully express to Jalta how much he had changed her life. With one last look into his warm eyes, she felt that he understood. The park rangers had captured their special moments on film and asked if they could share the footage on YouTube to promote the park. Victoria agreed, grateful for the keepsake. To her surprise, the video went viral, shocking viewers around the world. It showcased the park's incredible work in reintroducing animals to the wild and challenged misconceptions about gorillas. People were moved by Jalta's gentle nature, which contradicted the violent image many held. As Victoria left the park one last time, she reflected on how her expectations had been far exceeded. Her encounter with Jalta felt almost too extraordinary to be real. To say her life had changed was an understatement. Now, we want to hear from you. How do you feel about Victoria and Jalta's connection? How would you have reacted in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.